welcome to my channel where we talk about cool cars, cool technology, and alternative fuels. Welcome back to the 1984 Lincoln Town Car. Keeping in theme with the transmission upgrades that talked about on the truck, if you've seen the video that I just did on the kind of creature comfort additions to the truck. Did some stuff to the transmission. And this car is no exception to the transmission work theme of this summer. Not a whole lot was really needed to be done on this car. Got about 20,000 miles on it, just did basic maintenance. Of course, you got the 5.0 V8 AODE transmission, basically a 4R70W with a different gear set in it. Pretty rock solid drivetrain, wasn't expecting any problems, and I'm happy to report that there pretty much haven't been any. However, a little bit has been done. I pulled the entire engine harness apart, which is why it was probably messed up in the last video because I just put it in, and it's still a little bit apart over there because I just pulled it out. I pulled the entire engine harness out. I unfortunately got a hold of something called copper-clad aluminum wire. It's somewhat difficult to tell that it's anything different than regular copper wire. You strip the wire, it looks like copper, there doesn't seem to be anything wrong with it, but it's actually aluminum underneath a very thin copper coating. That wire is maybe better than aluminum wire, but it's awful. They'll sell it as primary automotive wire, doesn't say anything about aluminum, and I realized it, but not before I'd put it in the engine harness. So that was a bit frustrating. Things started to corrode very quickly, and I had one wire break, and I was like, pulling it all out. So pulled the entire thing out. Everything's replaced with what they call OFC copper wire, so hopefully no more corrosion issues. So that was kind of the engine bit of the engine harness removal. But of course the engine harness is really the transmission harness too. And while I had the harness out, I took a look at a problem I've been having with the transmission. So ever since I put this together, since day one, I didn't think lockup was happening correctly. The vehicle, I could get it to go first gear, second gear, and from experience, it should go third gear, lock the converter, and then fourth gear. Well, this was going first, second, third, fourth, and I'd never felt the converter lock. And this is a big, heavy, unaerodynamic car, so when you're on the freeway cruising at 70, and you're going up an overpass, you are really accelerating quite hard. I have a little gauge in the gauge cluster that says what percentage of throttle I'm using, and it's about 50% throttle going up an overpass at 70 miles an hour, which this motor's not super powerful, but that seems excessive. And I also noticed that the engine was revving up. It's staying in overdrive, fourth gear, but the engine was revving up, and I was like, hey, something's not right here. So I kind of just ignored it. It was like, maybe it's the tune, you know, or whatever. Then it did the right thing and got fed up with it and immediately wung an engine computer in it because, as we all know, the right thing to do when you don't know what's wrong with it is to just put an engine computer in it. That's the wrong thing to do, but that's what happens a lot. But the engine computers are pretty cheap, especially one from the junkyard. You don't need to program it, it's OBD1. So pretty simple. And I had a sneaky suspicion that the engine computer, I did a little bit of diagnostics. I figured it was the problem. I put an engine computer in it, and then we had the opposite problem. The vehicle engaged lockup all the time, which is like trying to drive a stick shift without having a clutch pedal. And the thing stalled out when you tried to stop. So I knew it was something computer related because the guy didn't do anything else, got one computer not locking it, one computer locking it too much. This didn't seem right. So when I had the harness out, I checked all the wiring and just double checked everything. Then I got the Ford service manual out. Like, what can cause no lockup? Has a list of like, do this check, this check, this check, this check. All right, I'll do them. And then I realized in that series of checks, it talked about driving the vehicle on the highway and pushing the brake at the same time as the gas, and the converter should unlock. That's like a test that you can do. I was like, well, how does it know that you're pushing the brake pedal to even unlock the converter in the first place? And that led me down the rabbit hole of, oh, well, yeah, it needs a brake signal input, and it's like, Oh, well, maybe that's what it's not happy about. I wouldn't think that not having, I think this was my original thought when I wired it, it doesn't need a brake signal input. It might run a little funky when you try to stop, but it really doesn't need that in order to function properly. Well, apparently it does. It needs to know when you're pushing the brakes in order to engage the overdrive lockup, converter lockup. So I was like, okay, well, let me give it a shot. And sure enough, I hooked that wire up, and then replaced the engine computer another time for good measure because the one was from a junkyard. So I put in another one that was probably from a junkyard. It was a rebuilt unit, but likely from a junkyard or wrecked car or something at some point. So between wiring up the brake on-off input, putting a new engine computer in it, rewiring all the wires that were copper-clad aluminum, and actually hooking up the air conditioner signal wire, which is related to none of this. It just, the engine kind of stumbled. Like if you turn the air conditioner on, when it was in closed loop fueling, and then you put it in gear, it would stumble. And I kind of noticed, it's like, it doesn't happen when you first start it, so when in open loop. If you unplug the oxygen sensors, open loop, it doesn't happen. And then I started thinking, well, it's probably getting that fuel mixture right perfect, and then you load it up, and it's not, doesn't want to change anything, because it thinks everything's perfect, except it's seeing engine RPM going down. It does all kinds of funky stuff. Sure enough, hook the air conditioner sense wire up, and it runs a whole lot better at idle, and just when you're trying to barely accelerate, doesn't want to stumble and act like it's a bad tune or something like that. So that's all kind of the underhood, mechanical and electrical things that have been done to this car. Really, apart from that, nothing else has been done to the car. Did a little bit to the blind spot cameras. The sealant I used originally was no good. They said it was good for 25 years. It was good for about 2.5 months. So I put in different sealant, a thicker one, and so far so good on that. The control boards for the dashboard are different. Instead of the Raspberry Pis with an Android port over to them, they are Asus Tinker boards, which are the same footprint, physically the same size as the Raspberry Pi, a better GPU, and better support for Android, so no more dash crashing. I had the dashboard crashing on me while I was driving, and you can imagine that was probably frustrating, and so now no more dashboard crashing with the Tinker boards inside the vehicle. Apart from that, I don't think anything else was done, at least of interest anyways, just basic maintenance, and everything's been fine. Thank you so much for joining me with Lincoln, and I hope you enjoy.